Welcome to today's Corporate Venturing Insider series. Today we have Quin Garcia, founder of Autotech Ventures. Quin, welcome.
Thank you. Great to be here.
So I'd like to start by asking your journey into corporate venturing. So if you could maybe spend 2-3 minutes to share about your journey.
Sure. So I've been a car guy my whole life. Love transportation tech. All I want to do with my career is solve transport problems with tech. No interest, frankly, in any other sector outside of that. I went to Cornell and studied business there, and then on the side to kind of feed my automotive addiction, I became the head of the Cornell hybrid electric vehicle team, developing hybrid SUVs and competing against other universities. And that was kind of a light bulb moment for me. I had previously been building and racing cars primarily to show off and go fast and build stuff, but once I got into hybrids, I started to understand environmental implications of transport, and had a friend who passed away in a car accident, started to understand safety implications, geopolitical implications, oil wars and the like, and it became a little bit more for me than just cool cars.
Yep.
And so I graduated and I came back to California and joined a management consultancy that was a McKinsey spin out, and consulted to the auto industry and consumer electronics industry for some time there. Then went to grad school at Stanford and studied a combined master's program. On one hand, management science, basically quantitative MBA for nerds kind of thing.
Okay.
And then on the other hand, automotive engineering as part of Stanford's autonomous and advanced driver assistance systems research lab there. Graduated, and right after I graduated, met a person named Shaya Gassi, and joined this wacky Israeli American company called Better Place as part of the founding team in 2007 with a vision of going to nations and deploying electric car recharging infrastructure around those nations and then selling subscriptions to consumers to use that network.
Big mission.
Big mission, and we raised about $1 billion in venture funding for that, and I moved to Israel and did essentially technology partnerships in Israel, and then moved to Japan again, business development, tech partnerships, and then off to China, and so about 5 years in total with Better Place. And while I was living in China, I started to see that the tech giants were beginning to enter the transport sector.
Yes.
Transport sector is the largest on the planet. 15% of the global economy is transportation. The incumbent transport corporations had been somewhat insular and closed to outside innovation. They'd done internal R&D for the longest time. And as the tech giants started to enter, those incumbent transport corporations and automotive corporations started to become more open to embracing innovation from outside in the form of startups.
Yep.
And they started to invest in startups and do projects with startups and acquire startups. And I started to see that and said, hey, I want to create the world's leading mobility VC firm, and I want us to be a bridge between corporations who are hungry for external innovation and startup companies, and entrepreneurs who have some dream of solving some transport problem with tech but need capital and need assistance in scaling up. Corporations are phenomenal at scaling.
Yep.
They're a little slower to innovate. Startups, phenomenal at innovating, slower to scale. So they're kind of a match made in heaven, and we wanted to be the bridge between the two.
The bridge and the interface, because very many times it's actually very hard for big corporations to understand startups and startups to understand big corporations.
That's right.
So I'm sure this is part of the value add you bring.
That's right. Yeah. So we have the way our business model runs is basically we're a financially motivated investor. So we manage funds. We invest purely for financial gain out of those funds. Those funds attract deal flow. We see about 2,000 startups per year out of those funds. We invest in about 7 out of.
That's a very healthy ratio.
Yep. But those 2,000, even if we don't invest in them, they can be very interesting for a lot of our corporate LPs that we serve. So we have a team that manages the funds, and then we also have a team that is essentially a consulting arm. We call it the Strategic Partnerships team, and in that team is 5 people who are full-time just providing strategic benefit to the corporate LPs that have joined us. we've assembled the world's largest syndicate of transportation corporate LPs. We have the number one or number two corporation from pretty much every segment of the ground transport value chain. And those corporations partner with us because they're interested not in financial returns so much as strategic benefit, right? They want market intelligence. They want access to startups. They want to broaden their network and meet other corporations.
Yep.
Sometimes they also want training or education on building out their CVC function or educating their business units on the importance of the CVC function. So that consulting team, our strategic partnerships teams, ensures that that side of the house is running and the corporate LPs are happy with the strategic benefits. And then our investment team does all the deal sourcing and diligence and makes the investment decisions, sits on the boards and tries to drive financial returns.
Very nice. So if I was to summarize, you're a financial VC with corporate LPs, and you have an investment team that does pure financial VC work with financial gain, but you do have a team of 5, which I'm assuming is paid from the management fee, that brings these strategic benefits.
Yes.
Okay, very
exactly.
nice.
We, in addition to the strategic partnerships team and the investments team, we also have a portfolio services team.
Oh, okay.
And the portfolio services team exists to basically make our founders happy, make the founders and CEOs of our portfolio companies happy. How do we make them happy? We want to help them with transport-specific business development, so helping them access all the corporations that are in our LP base to do supply agreements and channel partnerships and customer relationships. Our portfolio services team also helps our portfolio companies with corporate development, meaning fundraising, and if they're engaging in M&A transactions or going public or otherwise. Third thing our portfolio services team does is help our portcos with talent. We have a head of talent, and his role is basically to help our companies find C-level executives, board members, advisors, and the like.
Wow, there's so much that's the same as TDK Ventures. So we don't call it the same. I mean, the investment team is the same. We have engagement teams that connect to the mothership, and for you, the corporate LPs. And then we have a scaling team, which is very much the same meaning of helping our portfolio companies scale. Yeah. And we also have a recruitment principle to help the same way. So there's so much that resonates. So maybe let me ask the questions about how do you decide for the third team, the portfolio team, which talent you want to recruit? Because I'm assuming you see the portfolio companies as your customer.
Yes. So our talent team, Tyson's his name, he's amazing. Our talent team focuses on, I'll call it C-level and up. So we're basically feeding candidates. We find, by having this this focus on transport, we have a dense network of talented people who are exited entrepreneurs. We have quite a few exited entrepreneurs, mobility entrepreneurs who are LPs in our funds. We have transportation family offices that have owned and operated transport businesses. We have transportation-focused fund of funds, sovereign wealth funds, and all those folks have really talented people who we can kind of bring to bear to help our portfolio companies. Sometimes these talented people can join our portfolio companies in the C-suite. Sometimes they'll become an advisor to the CEO. Sometimes they'll become an independent board director.
Yep.
Right. And so oftentimes when we're also looking at diligencing a startup for investment, we'll also find those individuals from our talent network and say, hey, we're thinking about investing in this company. What do you think? Would you like to get involved? Maybe you want to co-invest with us or join the board or even join full-time role with the company.
I think so. What I like is how much your personal journey and your passion about transportation, and you build a fund that's specialized in transportation, and this specialization allows you to have a very domain-focused network, which then you can bring to bear for your portfolio companies. What's next for that portfolio team? What is the next skills you want to bring to bear?
Yeah, so that team is growing. We're actually hiring quite a bit right now. We're increasing our headcount by 50%.
Okay, from how big is it?
Today we're 22.
Oh, wow.
people.
Okay.
And so we're going to add another, let's call it, dozen people or so
Okay.
over the course of this year and into early next year. And one of the functions that we're looking to strengthen is portfolio services. So we have a head of talent, Tyson.
Yep.
There we have Mitra doing business development, and now we're looking for someone to head our corporate development portfolio services function. So someone who really knows deeply how to fundraise for startups. Maybe they were an investment banker before. Maybe they were an entrepreneur, or maybe they were a C-level exec at a startup and
Yep.
got involved in the fundraise process. So really have kind of fought in the trenches for fundraising and can be
Which
kind of a
matters
fractional.
a lot.
Yeah, yeah.
Let me double click on the business development, because this is the one where someone go into the portfolio companies and help to link to potential customers.
Yeah.
Is there more to it, and how do you deliver on it?
Yeah, so three main types of business development. Supply relationships, so a large corporation or even another startup supplying something into one of our portfolio companies. Channel partnerships, meaning third parties that our portcos can use to access customers, intermediaries, if you will, and then direct customers, right? So those are kind of three types of BD relationships that we focus on. In terms of what types of corporations we target, it's highly dependent on the portfolio company's needs. So when we invest into a startup, we'll do onboarding, portfolio services onboarding with that startup, where we'll listen to the CEO and the other founders and hear their pain points and hear their needs and who they want access to, and then we project manage it, and we go out and we reach out to our LPs that are relevant, whether they be corporations or family offices or institutions or individuals. We will also reach out to non-LPs. So we have roughly 40-something corporate LPs, right? But there's thousands of really great corporations out there that our portfolio companies need access to. And so we will often reach out to those non-LPs as well and connect them up with our companies.
So even though you're not the typical corporate VC, you have three superpowers that I'm picturing now. You have, of course, this domain-focused network. You have this corporate LPs you can bring to bear and get knowledge and share back and connect. And then you have this portfolio team. Is all of this funded through the management fee, or is it some of it funded from the portfolio companies? How does that work?
Only management fees.
Only management fee.
We never charge any additional portfolio services
wonderful.
fees to our portcos. We don't charge any consulting fees to our corporate LPs. It all comes out of management fees.
Okay, this is a golden nugget here. I think it's very impressive. What do you see in 5 years from now for Autotech Ventures?
Yeah, so one way to think about it is our scope. Right. So presently, our scope is ground transportation only. Nothing that flies, nothing that floats. Right. Yep. You could imagine that there's other adjacent domains that we might, want to expand into. Maybe air transport, maybe maritime. Right. We're probably not going to go into healthcare or something that's
or space
radically. Maybe at some point. Maybe at some point. We've tried to stay grounded so far.
This is good.
But eventually, we might expand into some adjacent domains. Another way to think about where we'll be in 5 years from now. So we'll have more funds. We raise a new fund roughly every 3 years or so. So
Very
we'll
nice.
raise another fund. We'll have more AUM, assets under management. We'll have more talent around the table. We might be 30 to 50 people by then. Our fund one by then will probably have been dissolved and exited all the portfolio companies.
Wow.
And I personally, I think that this penetration of the transport sector by the tech industry, or convergence, however you want to think about it, of the two, I think there's a couple decades of action to play here.
I actually personally believe it's endless. Transportation is a need that cannot be resolved. It's going to keep innovating. So you're going to have a job for a long time.
Okay, good.
Very nice. So one of the disciplines of a financial VC is to build very good, high conviction investment thesis. Yeah. How do you go about building an investment thesis? And here I'm thinking about the audience, thinking about what are the best practices you've developed to build an investment thesis?
Right. Yeah. So, variety of ways. One, meeting a lot of companies, just meeting a ton of startups. I mean, I think one of the very best parts of our job is we get to meet these brilliant people,
Amazing people.
who are extremely expert in this one very niche domain. So you get to basically interview a world expert,
Yep.
right, in something, right, and learn something new every day. And so by interviewing a bunch of really expert people, you can start to kind of form a view on a given investment domain, a given space, and that's one way you can do it. There's also really brilliant people inside of corporations, right, who are domain experts that have spent their career in some niche, some specialization. And so we go and we talk to our corporate LPs executives and kind of interview them and get to know them, learn their pain points. What do you need? What do you need is often what we ask, and hear their pain points. But if you listen only to one side, you get skewed a little bit.
Yep.
If you listen to entrepreneurs too much, they can lead you astray, right?
Yep.
If you listen to corporate executives too much, it can also kind of lead you astray or cause you to have blinders on, if you will, right? So very important to listen to both sides, and truth is often somewhere in the middle. So meeting a lot of companies, spending a lot of time with our corporate LP executives, talking with other VCs, also really important. Hiring our team, right? Growing our team and finding world-class people on our team. Whether Sterling Anderson's a venture partner with us, and he founded Aurora Innovation, and world-class roboticist and autonomous driving,
which actually matters for transportation.
Yeah. Tony Remus just joined us, world-class in auto commerce. We have a bunch of other talented people. I won't go into all 22 of us, but those are two examples.
Everyone can check your website.
Yeah.
And I'm sure by the time they watch the video, maybe there will be a few more added anyway.
Yeah.
How do you recruit? Because clearly here you're looking at top talent, which are hard to get. Clearly you have a mission, which they have to resonate with. But how do you recruit?
So we have a head of talent. His name is Tyson Bennett. He and I work very closely on recruiting.
So he does not only work for portfolio companies.
Yes, works. He also does our internal recruiting for our talent to join us, and he's running 10 searches in parallel right now. So he's a very, very busy guy right now. He and I work very closely on recruiting. It's something that I love. I love to do. I love talking to people, and I love learning from them and meeting new people. And so he and I work closely and build relationships with talented people who have skills that we lack. Right. So my kind of personal approach to recruiting is look at an organization and do a gap analysis, basically. Like, what are we missing?
Yeah.
And what are we missing could come in the form of network.
Yes.
Right. There might be a community that we really want to access, but we don't have access to. Right. Maybe it's a country, India, for example, or Massachusetts. Right. So community is one thing that we look at. How can someone bring a Rolodex to bear to benefit our firm? Another thing we look at is credibility, right? So the perception of the outside world that they have about a person, and if that person is perceived very positively, it's great for our firm. It builds our brand to have people that are super respected as part of our organization. Third thing that we look at is skills. How do you actually get stuff done, right?
Yes.
The ability to complete tasks. In very simple terms, right? So, context, credibility, skills are kind of what we're often looking at when we're hiring someone. We're looking for thought diversity. So we're looking for someone who thinks differently than us, that knows something that we don't.
How do you interview for that?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, you can ask very pointed questions around someone's personal Rolodex, if you will. Mm-hmm. Where have you been? Where have you lived? Which companies? Which communities are you a part of? Which cultures do you understand deeply? So, we can talk very pointedly about that. Another is what tasks have you completed? Right? Mm-hmm. What have you built before, right? And you can get a feel for what people are good at. You can also test them, right? So a lot of times, many interview processes, you'll ask the candidate, hey, let's work on a project together. Let's see how we work together. So let's see
Yep.
how we, not just your skills, but it's a bilateral relationship.
It has
so
to be a match.
how do we work together? Do we interpersonally jive? Do we work great? And can we collectively solve problems? So also, that holds true not only for hiring people to join our firm, but also entrepreneurs. When we're investing into a company, right, we're going to have to work alongside and support that entrepreneur for many years. It's like a marriage, as they say, right? And so you have to have that that compatibility with the entrepreneur and also that conviction. And maybe not quite as passionate as the entrepreneur is about solving that problem, because no one can.
You don't want the bias to be too strong either.
Yeah.
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 So when we look at the investment team, how do you build an investment team? You talked about the diversity of thoughts, but one team that could actually start to build not just investment thesis, but contrarian view. And how do you have a process that allows a contrarian view to get all the way to an investment?
So we have, I kind of view myself more as a builder than an investor. If you ask me my identity,
Okay.
I'm not as excited about transacting and investing as I am being part of the journey and helping someone over a very long period of time to solve some problems. So that's what personally excites me. But I think there's another skill set, the skill set of being a deal maker. Having that excitement around transactions and investing is extremely important. And we have really talented people on our deal team who are frankly different than me and better than me in many ways at investing. Right, so Asap, Brock, Alexei, Dan, Sterling, Tony, they're all unique in their own ways, but they're all very seasoned and frankly in most cases more seasoned deal makers than I am, and so I get to learn from them and watch from them. But then maybe sometimes they also get to learn a little something from me. That's kind of going back to our ethos around bringing people together who have, let's say, diversity of thought around the table is important to us.
Because diversity without including the ideas and letting them prosper, there's no point in it. So I like to double click on that process. How does someone build that idea and get it approved? Because there you have an approval process.
Yeah. So we actually we come together and we have workshops where we talk about investment domains that we think are important, absent a given deal. So we're not actually talking about a specific startup in a space at all.
An exploration.
We're just talking about a domain in general. And I actually look at domains through the lens of pain points. I think that's our job is basically to find companies and people who are solving someone else's pain. And what is technology? Technology is automation. You're automating a human task with technology. So how can we solve pain points by automating tasks for someone? So we like to ask around and talk to folks. Hey, what's hurting you? What are you in pain about? Not only our LPs, but other folks in the outside world who are not in our LP base. So listen to people's pain, and if there's enough pain in a given domain, that's great. Check. Then the next question becomes, well, is there an opportunity to use technology or an innovative business model? So those are kind of two main forms of innovation: business model or tech to automate tasks, right? So there's some opportunity to use one or both of those things to solve the pain, right? Another question then becomes, well, okay, if you have a big pain, also known as a great market opportunity, and you have some different, some ability to use tech or business model to solve that pain, well, then is there a team that's actually out there that's uniquely qualified and capable to realize that vision? That's another question, and there's a variety of other kind of cascading questions from there. But
I can see your personality as builder. Not just building Autotech Ventures, but also building for your portfolio companies and helping you build. And that's probably why you have this portfolio team. You really want to help your entrepreneurs.
Yeah. It's fun. It's fun to live vicariously through an entrepreneur's journey. It's a painful journey always. for the entrepreneur. And
But you've been there, you've done
ups
it.
and downs, all along the way. And I think that's one of the very best parts of our job is not only getting to talk with entrepreneurs,
Yep.
but also once we actually invest into an entrepreneur, into a company, to be there along for the ride and see all the ups and downs of all these companies happening all at once.
How early do you invest?
As early as pre-seed.
Okay.
I would say our sweet spot, if you ask me the greatest in number of our portfolio, is seed. But we've done pre-seed companies, 2 guys in a slide deck, in some cases, or actually 1 gal on a slide deck in another
But
case.
repeat entrepreneurs or not?
We've done both. We've done first-time entrepreneurs and then also serial entrepreneurs. Pre-seed, we feel at pre-seed we feel more comfortable with an experienced entrepreneur because the risk is highest. The younger the company, the higher the risk, right? But as as a company matures a little bit, it's okay to have a first-time entrepreneur.
So early also means it's mostly about the entrepreneurs. And so how does your team engage with the entrepreneur, assess the entrepreneur, maybe interview the entrepreneur? You mentioned also brainstorming with the entrepreneur. I'm sure you have a few tips you can share with the audience.
Everyone on our team has a different style of assessing mutual fit with an entrepreneur. So I can't speak for everyone. I can say in my case, right now I'm actually exploring very deeply an investment with an entrepreneur right now, and we've spent a lot of time together. We went skiing together, right?
Okay.
We went and went to a Sharks game together, hockey game together. So just spent a lot of time.
So the entrepreneur listening will know it's
Yes, yeah. Is it true? Okay. And so spending a lot of time just getting to know someone deeply, understanding, not only their, those 3 dimensions I mentioned earlier, right? So context, credibility, skills, but their personality and their personal history, because that, one's life experiences colors one's behavior going forward, right? So you can learn a lot about someone's future behaviors by looking at their past behaviors. So I personally like to spend a lot of time being open with an entrepreneur about myself, not putting a shield up and kind of like, here's who I am, right? Here, scars and all, right? Here's who I am. And I kind of expect the same, and I want.
You want to ensure the match.
Yeah,
because you're in it for probably 10 years together. So
let's find out now if we're not a fit, and let's go our separate ways.
So I think that's a golden nugget, which is when you invest so early, do spend time with the entrepreneur. Don't just do 1 hour, 2 hours. It really matters to get to know them, but them to know you.
Yeah.
And you say you can't speak for the others, but what other style from your team you've noticed you think that's actually interesting?
Tactics that our team uses, that our deal team uses, that are really interesting.
Yeah, you thought, oh, I would never have done it, but that's interesting.
Yeah, a lot of I won't mention the name of the colleague, but one of our colleagues, he's very good at the beginning of the meeting with the entrepreneur, showing his ability to add value for the entrepreneur, as opposed to grilling or vetting or assessing,
interviewing
an entrepreneur. Hey, tell me about, it's all about you. Tell me about you. He starts by building rapport with the entrepreneur, and starts by talking about his personal experiences and appreciation for the entrepreneur's space and ways he might be able to help. And then only after that rapport is built, then he gets
this
into
is
evaluation.
genius. Because you get the entrepreneur to feel relaxed, which means they will be the best self when they are going to explain their project.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Gets the the defenses down when you, like in any situation, right? Building a connection with someone first can really result in more open conversation.
Very nice. Now let's talk about a different type of match, which is your VC with a corporate LPs. You've raised 2 funds. Is there any tips you can share about how do you make sure this is a match on both sides?
Right. Yeah. So with our corporate LPs, there's, again, it goes back to openness. being upfront with the LP about what we're good at, what we think we're good at, what we're not good at, the types of interactions or services that we want to provide them, and the types that we don't, right? The way we will behave with respect to investments, right? So we're very upfront with LPs that we will only invest for financial gains. Sorry, we will never invest for your strategic benefit, or not invest for your strategic benefit. We'll invest for financial gains, but there's this wonderful collateral benefit of having all that deal flow and having these consulting services, if you will, that's going to make sure you derive strategic benefit from the relationship. Another thing that we're very upfront with our corporate LPs about in the early days is we will never ever share a startup's confidential information with a corporate LP. We won't send a deck. There won't. We're not gonna.
But you can connect them.
We can connect. We can share our opinions of a company with a corporate LP. We can share public domain information like a website or a LinkedIn page with an LP, but we can't share anything confidential. And the LPs, when we kind of establish that up front, the LPs are super respectful of it. They get it, right? And they don't want to be exposed to all the risks of.
Actually,
of
they don't want the liabilities. They don't want the trade secrets.
Yeah. So we just introduce directly between a startup, whether it's our portfolio company or not. We'll just introduce directly, and it's a win for everybody, right? The entrepreneur is very happy to talk to the LP, which can be a potential BD partner or investor or acquirer or otherwise. The LP is very happy; they get to meet this amazing entrepreneur company, right? And we're happy because we've made kind of both of them happy, and we get to learn from both sides' interactions.
So, how many portfolio companies do you have now?
41, I think, as of today, maybe 42 by now.
So you have 40 plus portfolio companies, plus many startups you meet that you find useful to introduce to corporate LPs. And you have 40 plus corporate LPs.
Yes. About 15 per fund.
15
we have 3 funds.
Okay.
About 15 per fund.
That's a lot of engagements for a team of 5. Maybe you can share some best practices about how can they be so effective?
Yes. So we only have one active, one fund that is making new investments into startups at a time.
Makes sense.
And we end up raising a new fund about every 3 years,
okay.
right? And so the first 3 years of a fund's life is making new investments. And then the subsequent 3 years, let's call it years 4 through 6, is making follow-on investments into those existing portfolio companies, right? And then years 7 and onward is, let's say, harvesting, right? So achieving exits. So our activity with the corporate LPs is highest during those first 3 years, when we're looking at brand new deals. We're jointly diligencing startups. We're forming theses together.
Domain specific,
right? And then after, we're providing them consulting services to make sure they're getting all the strategic benefit from the relationship. And then we go, after 3 years, we stop making new investments out of that fund, and we raise a new fund. And we start making investments out of that new fund. And the LPs who join that new fund get involved in our investment process for that new fund and receive strategic services from that new fund as well.
But does it mean that after 3 years, the consultancy team moves on and no longer looks at that portfolio?
So the consultancy team turns the majority of their attention to the LPs that are in the latest fund.
I see. Okay.
However, the LPs in the prior fund, they still remain highly valued LPs, and they still call us, and we still call them. We host networking events throughout the year, about 6 per year, where we bring together all the LPs to learn from each other and do deals with each other and share theses and the like. So it's still very important to us to remain highly engaged with the LPs that were in the prior fund. It doesn't, not every LP is going to re-up into your next fund. There's always some attrition. There's always going to be some change of strategy that a corporation has, or they'll get acquired, or something will happen, right? So we always have kind of a new flow of LPs joining the latest fund that fit our strategy and our needs for that latest fund.
And would you say the reason number one for the corporate LPs is to have access to these startups, curated choice? Or is it your opinions of startups or opinion of the domains that they value the most? Or is it a mix?
Yeah, so our corporate LPs, they don't actually generate that much deal flow for us. Here and there, they'll send us deals that we haven't seen, but vast majority of cases, we will find the startups before they do. So it's primarily us sharing deal flow with them, but they're heavily supporting our diligence of startups. As I mentioned earlier, they also support our thesis formation, right? As we're talking about different domains, and after we invest into a company, they often will co-invest alongside us, coincident with our initial investment. And in some cases, they'll participate maybe in the next round or the next round, thereafter. I'd say the most frequent type of collaboration is projects with the startups, POCs, pilots, supply agreements, channel partnerships. That's the most common type of interaction. Second most common would be a minority equity investment by the corporate LP. The least common would be an acquisition of the portfolio company by the LP, but it's happened
Very
before.
nice.
Yeah.
And all of these POC and engagements, do you track it and you track it over time?
Yes, we do. Yes, we have a CRM. We track very closely the types of engagements that we have with the portfolio companies, so we can track how much value we're adding to the portfolio companies through our portfolio services function. And then we're also tracking our interactions with the corporate LPs as well. To again, you can manage what you track, right? So we have to track it so we can observe how we manage what you measure, right? Is that the saying?
You can only improve what you measure.
There we go.
I think that's
yes, you said it better than I can.
So earlier you said the entrepreneurs are your customers, but do you also see the corporate LPs as your customer, or more like shareholders? How do you see them?
They're our customers. They're members of our community. We look at what we're building as a community. We want to create the world's strongest community of people who happen to be inside companies, of people who share our passion for transport tech. So we view ourselves as community builders.
Yep.
And by focusing only on transportation, we have a dense set of affinity, right? So people's affinity just for transportation. So with every additional corporate LP that we add to the community, that LP adds value to the rest of the community, right? It's another
an ecosystem
connection that corporate LP can have with another corporate LP or have with an entrepreneur, one of our portfolio companies. Similarly, with every new portfolio company we add, it's again another possible connection between two portfolio companies, or another possible connection between that new portfolio company and an LP on this side. So we think of our business as in some ways a marketplace, a two-sided marketplace. You could think of it.
Yeah, you need to bring value to both, otherwise it's not going to be sustainable.
And you need to create network effects, right? In that every additional member of the community can add value for other members of the community.
I really like the network effect analogy. It does make sense as a marketplace. So now I want to ask about investment decision making. How do you perfect that? And how do you perfect it? Clearly you build an investment thesis in a given domain. That probably helps you to spot which startup, which entrepreneur to invest in more quickly than if you were not prepared. So this preparedness probably helps a lot. But how do you go with the decision-making process?
Yeah, we'll never perfect our investment process. It's perpetually flawed. We constantly have to learn, and we constantly fail. I mean, VC is kind of like baseball, right? If you're batting 300, you're one of the best in the world, right? So you're failing a lot, right? Yes. And one tactic that we and some other VC firms use to learn and improve is, we call it anti-portfolio analysis.
Oh,
right?
Very humbling.
Let's look at our failures and let's track those failures. Our failure to invest in a phenomenal company, right? Yeah. Let's look at that and say, why did that happen? Did that happen because we didn't see the company? Meaning it's an access problem?
Yeah.
Did it happen because we didn't choose the company? Meaning it's a selection problem? Or did it happen because we couldn't reach agreement on deal terms with the company? Meaning it was a negotiation breakdown? Why did that happen? So we look at that We track very closely the companies we miss, and we miss a lot of them.
How regularly do you do this and systematically?
About every year or so.
Very nice.
About every year, go through a multi-month exercise, iterative exercise with the team, workshopping.
Wow. I think that's how you actually improve, because if it's access, it could be about which VC partner did invest, which maybe you were not intimate enough, and then you can reconnect with that VC.
Yep.
So I find this retrospection very important to improve. And it's not necessarily process, but it's sometimes connections and people.
Yeah. It's kind of, I mean, to use automotive parlance, it's kind of like
You're allowed.
It's kind of like an FMEA, right? It's similar in some ways to a failure mode effects analysis, right?
And you go back and try to find the low-hanging fruits first. And
Yes.
I like how you always refer back to transportation. Now, I will challenge. Transportation sounds very focused, but transportation touches everything. Electrification, even the grid, the business model innovations. How do you keep some discipline in terms of what you look, and more importantly, what you decide not to look?
Right. So we, as I mentioned earlier, we do only ground transport.
Which is still big.
It's still very big. I mean, if you look at the different transport modalities, the main, right, it's maritime, air, ground, right? What's the biggest of the three? Ground, right? So still a very large domain that we're talking about, and transport, as I mentioned, is the largest sector on the planet. So it's still a huge space, right? Yep. Well, why don't we choose air transport? Why don't we choose maritime instead? If you ask my opinion about maritime, there isn't as much disruption. Some people don't like using that word, but I'll use it. There isn't as much of a shakeup happening in the maritime space. Like if you look at the tech giants, where have they focused their efforts? Yep. Right? Are they all pumping resources into maritime? Not as much, right?
I think the TAM is probably an order of magnitude smaller, if not two, and the barrier to entry is so much harder for a startup.
Yes.
So that makes sense. Actually, the maritime would not be your first choice.
Unless you're living in the fjords of Norway, right? So the majority of maritime is actually cargo, right? And it's not as much passenger transport. In air, you have cargo.
You do.
You have a lot of passenger transport too, right? In ground, you have a ton of passenger and cargo. So maritime's a little bit more of a B2B-ish space, which is not a bad thing. B2B is very attractive for VCs to invest in, but I would say it's a smaller niche, right? And so you have to kind of draw the line somewhere in your investment scope and the extent to which you want to be a generalist versus a specialist. And we just happen to choose to exclude maritime from our scope. Air, there is a lot of innovation happening in air transport, right? Ton of innovation there. One personal opinion that I have is the startups in that space have a longer focal length or time horizon in order to realize substantial revenue, let alone
including
profitability.
Regulations.
There's more regulations. There's much longer time to market, time to revenue, time to profitability, right? And so, if you have, let's say, a 20-year fund, like some VCs have, or a 15-year fund, you can invest, in companies that might not actually really generate meaningful revenue for many, many years to come, right? We have a slightly shorter focal length, typical, 10-year funds is what we do, and so we found that, there may be some air opportunities that can generate meaningful near-term revenue, but there's not quite as many as you have in ground transport. So,
absolutely.
Maybe at some point we could get into air or maritime, just not yet.
So let me ask about micromobility, because that's probably something that you had convictions 5 years ago, 3 years ago, last year, this year, really changing fast. I mean, before COVID, during COVID, now, and the market really crashing on all the micromobility companies. I'm not asking really your investment thesis, but more how you have evolved it over time.
Yes. So micromobility, came along. Let's say it became a widely hyped space what was it, 2017,
I think so.
2018, right around there is when you started to see the birth of Bird
San Francisco
and Lime
and
Tier and Boy, right? And the cities had been burned by ride sharing.
multiple times.
And so the cities had kind of learned their lesson from ride sharing. And so we saw a more draconian reaction from a lot of the cities to regulating micromobility than we saw when ride sharing first hit the scene, right? And so San Francisco clamped down, and other cities, clamped down. We're going to have permits, and you're going to follow these regulations, right? So when we saw that first wave of micromobility startups come along around, let's say 2017, we looked at them and we thought, well, how are they differentiating from each other?
Yes.
Right? And what are the barriers to entry? Right? So if you oversimplify it, you can say, you start up a micromobility fleet by buy a bunch of scooters, write an app, throw the scooters on the sidewalk. See who comes, right? It's an oversimplification.
It's what I like to call a red lake. It's not a red ocean, it's a red lake.
I'm half joking, but the barriers to entry, in my opinion, were fairly low. And so how do you differentiate yourself if your scooters are not that different, your app's not that different, your customer experience is not that different, and you have governments coming in and regulating you
city by city,
right? So we thought, how are they going to differentiate? And initially, that first batch of scooter sharing startups, in my opinion, differentiated through capital formation. Differentiation through capital formation, meaning their ability to raise money. Some just raised more money and burned more money than others. And we, as a fairly small fund, don't have the depth of pockets and the massive checkbook to fund
subsidize,
however you want to think about it, to fund that type of strategy, right? And so we waited and we sat on the sidelines and we waited and we looked for, how could we find a startup that has some defensibility, some barrier to entry, and we eventually came across a startup in Turkey called Marti, M-A-R-T-I.
Okay.
And they had actually become, in my opinion, the national champion of the Turkish scooter sharing space, majority market share, right?
King of the hill,
if you will. And Turkey also had some different policies that made it a little bit harder for non-Turkish companies to enter the Turkish market. And so we said, well, this company, really great founders, seasoned entrepreneurs, really sharp people, and this dominant position out in the Turkish market, we think this could become a national champion, and so we invested. So we saw some defensibility there. We also came across another startup called VEO, VEO, based here in the U.S. They're actually based in LA area, and as we learned about them, they had a unique approach. One, they had access and have access to a very prominent bike and scooter manufacturing, a very close relationship with a bike and scooter manufacturing company,
which is important
in Asia,
especially for unit economics.
For unit economics, for the scooter durability has been a big issue for the micromobility space. The designs are iterating very, very rapidly, and when you have that close relationship, you can get the very latest and greatest of designs that satisfy your customer needs and allow you to differentiate. So that was one form of differentiation we liked about VEO and that we still like. The other thing we noticed is the company would only enter markets where there was constrained supply, meaning that they would only enter markets where the authority, whether it be a university or whether it be a municipality, a city, issues a limited number of permits. And so by constraining supply in a given region, you can improve economics for the operators in the region. If you do not constrain supply at all, everyone can flood that market and drive margins to zero, right? And so they said, you know what, we're going to go for maybe smaller markets, a lot of college towns where a university can actually provide us a single permit, and we actually, in a sense, can have like a monopoly in some places, or maybe they have 2 or 3 permits that they'll grant. So they started there and succeeded there and had great unit economics, and now they've started to expand into other large cities that again have a limited number of permits, like say New York and Seattle and LA and a few others.
What I like is that you were disciplined to wait until you saw something that made sense for you. You didn't react to the hype. You were like, nothing is differentiated, I'm not going to invest. Then you find one that had an advantage in the country, which was big enough actually to make it a good market to start.
Yeah.
Another one who had a very shrewd strategy.
Yeah, and Marta they've publicly announced they're working on an IPO. Tough time to be working on an IPO, but we have a lot of faith in them, and VO keeps on growing quite nicely, and we actually led their last round. That was a couple years back, and they're still growing quite nicely, and if that's any indication of how their unit economics work.
Very nice. And that leads actually to a question I wanted to ask is, when do you decide to lead and when do you decide to follow a syndicate?
So at the early stage, we primarily do early stage investing. We'll do a little bit at mid stage, let's say Series B, Series C, right? Mm-hmm. If our initial investment is at the mid stage, we're more likely to be a follow, right, to someone else's as lead because of the round size tends to be larger. At the early stage, we're more likely to be a lead, but we've often co-led investments alongside another venture firm, right? And there's even a few cases where we've been a follow. We feel comfortable following another venture firm into an investment if we have a lot of respect for the people who are on the board and who are going to be highly influential to the company. Obviously the entrepreneurs, but also the other VCs in the syndicate. Very important for us to feel that our incentives are aligned, our vision for the investment is aligned. So we're happy to follow in that case.
Very nice. And of course, financial gain, again, is your number one. How do you think about ownership, especially for an early investment? Do you have like a minimum ownership that you want to see, or you're quite flexible?
10 to 30% is typically, if you're talking about an early stage initial investment. In the mid-stage investments, which are more opportunistic, maybe only 20% of our portfolio is companies where our initial investment was Series B or C. Our ownership percentage will be lower than that, lower than 10% in those cases.
And do you see a potential for this mid-stage to still return the fund individually? Or do you think it's more portfolio mix and strategy?
There are, a mid-stage company, on average is less likely, it's a lower risk return profile than an early stage company. Yep. So lesser likelihood of returning the fund, also lesser likelihood of turning zero, right? Yep. So slightly lower risk return profile, but mid-stage companies, they can really go big, and be capable of returning the fund. So we're probably underwriting to a slightly lower likelihood of it returning the fund, but a non-zero likelihood of returning the fund. We did a number of mid-stage investments in our Fund 1 some years ago and had some great outcomes. Indie Semiconductor went public a couple years back. Their stock has been trading above $10, and company's been doing quite well. And that was a mid-stage investment for us. Spot Hero, #1 parking app in North America, basically off-street parking marketplace. That one's been very successful. I mean, during COVID, no one was parking, but their business has come raging back. Really well-run company. Another mid-stage investment for us that we think could go public in the coming years and potentially return the fund. So
maybe one way to look at it is when you do mid-stage, you look at the one that could become public.
Yes. I would say, exit magnitudes for IPOs tend to be larger than exit magnitudes for strategic acquisitions. Acquisition by a strategic buyer, which tend to be larger than acquisitions by a financial buyer, also known as a private equity firm, right? So if you look at magnitude, right, what's the biggest and best exit for VCs in general? IPO. Second best, strategic acquirer. Third best tends to be, private equity buyer.
Another part of financial VC discipline is having a reserve of the fund and follow investment strategy. How do you think about it? Do you have a fixed reserve? Do you have a view on the follow strategy?
Yeah, we definitely reserve capital, sometimes maybe 2x of what our initial investment, maybe even 3x in some cases. If we think a company is going to be more capital hungry, right? It depends on the syndicate, depends on their business plan, how capital intensive they are, a variety of factors. But usually when we're making an initial investment at the early stage, we're holding maybe 2x or so in reserves to participate in subsequent rounds. If our initial investment comes at a mid stage, presumably the company won't need as much capital because it's become a little bit more mature, and so we can hold a little bit less in reserve, maybe 1x, right? Or if we think it's going to be very high likelihood of being the last round, you could even have scenario where you don't hold a reserve, right? And then everyone, did Mike Tyson say everyone has a plan until they get punched in the face? So you invest, and then all kinds of unexpected things happen after you invest, and then you have to dynamically reallocate your reserves. Some companies are outperforming, and you can increase the amount of capital you invest in them, and some of them are not doing great, and maybe you actually, because they're not doing great, you want to invest more to kind of help them along. And in some cases they're not doing well, and you realize that there's not a clear path to success, and you just have to kind of cut your losses, if you will.
Sometimes it's hard for the investment person who did the investment to see it. How do you make sure that somehow you normalize it?
Yeah, it's both a great thing for a deal lead, a deal maker, to have that conviction and passion and bias.
Yeah.
All right, it's an opportunity. It's a wonderful thing, but it also sometimes can be a disservice to the firm or the investment, the fund, the LPs, right? So you have to strike that very careful balance of having strong conviction and bias, but also counterbalancing voices. And so we're not the type of firm that allows that are, let's call it a collective of lone wolves. Meaning, we're not the type of firm that allows a deal lead to make decisions solely by themselves, right? So we look and we try to drive for consensus, and we view it as a team sport rather than an individual sport. So when it comes to follow-on investments, the deal lead comes to the rest of the deal team and makes the pitch for subsequent.
And that's important. So we're getting to the end of this interview, which was really fascinating. I want to ask, for the last 2 minutes, tell us what you are excited about investing next, and next 12 months to 18 months.
Mm-hmm. Personally, so our firm, everyone has their own unique passions. I personally am very excited about auto repair. I'm a former auto mechanic. In college, I was.
You have a bias.
I was an auto mechanic,
Okay.
and I, at Better Place, I was engineering and diagnosing and repairing a lot of our prototype, EVs that we were using to promote our business, and so really passionate about repair, not only due to my past experiences, but also the amount of pain. Going back to our discussion around pain points. Consumers hate getting their car fixed. It's a very painful experience, low NPS, right? People feel gouged. People feel upsold, even when they're not being gouged or upsold.
Yeah,
right?
but the sentiment is there.
It's there, and so I'm really thinking a lot about how could you solve for that to make getting your car fixed a better experience.
From a painful experience to something delightful.
Yeah, that's right, or at least tolerable.
Very good.
Yeah.
Very good. Thank you so much for your time. This was a really wonderful interview. A lot of best practices, touching actually on financial VC discipline as well as working with corporates, having 3 different teams with very different functions, and I can see the entrepreneur's first mindset coming through everything you do. So thank you so much, Quin.
Thank you. This was fun.
Thank you.
Yeah.